Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll try to be strict in 10 minutes time. So in this presentation, I will give a glimpse into the tools for analyzing and doing musicological research on travel reports, taking as an example German travelogues of the 18th century describing Portuguese music in state ceremonies. I will first contextualize German reports, then go through some examples, briefly expose a three-level analysis model, and finally draw some conclusions. So the German travel journals, once contextualized by a series of filters and subjective appreciations, give us precious tools to better understand Portuguese musical practice at the end of the Ancien Régime. However, these accounts cannot be considered neutral, since they carry an implicit narrative related to the cultural context of the writer. In order to use these texts and obtain through them important information, it is necessary to remove a series of filters, confronting the material with the social, musical, historical, and personal context in which it was produced. Each traveler brings with them a representation of the world that they necessarily apply to the reality observed. To analyze, as far as possible, this representation and to separate in the respective travelogues the factual aspects from the subjective ones is one of the many challenges of historical musicological research. So German authors tend to evaluate what they see and hear in the light of aesthetic ideals of German pre-Romanticism in vogue at this time at their place of origin, often railing, for example, against what they seem to think to be an excessive protagonism of Italian opera in Portugal and Brazil. They expect to find an opera in Portuguese or nationalistic subjects and find with displeasure that what they see and hear are mostly the same operas and the same repertoire they would hear in the Italian theater of their own town city. Another great misunderstanding is the absence of the king or the queen in the operas. Contrary to what happened at the Prussian or Saxon court, where the king used the physical space of the opera theater for the majestic representation and staging of royal power, in Portugal, this representation of power was performed mainly in the religious sphere, in the great public events associated with religious forums, such as the churches, processions, and also in street events such as bullfights. So I will now give some examples. A German traveler visiting the Royal Theatre of Salvaterra de Magos in 1763 praised the quality of the Royal Chapel, which he called excellent, but was, on the other hand, very disappointed with the lightness of the protocol in the Royal Opera House of the Salvaterra de Magos town, where the royal family spent the winter months. And he notices that, and I quote, "Here one can spend time daily with the royal family without any special ceremony," end of quotation. His critique to the lack of solemnity is implicit in this passage, and I quote, "To cap off the amusement of Carnival, in recent days, the roles were changed. The mistress played the father, the grandparents played the roles of the children, etc. I never heard anyone laughing louder and more convinced than the queen, who once could not contain herself and fell breathlessly into the king's arms," end of quotation. So the queen, a woman who could not contain herself, who lacked the necessary mesure and lost all trace of dignity with her unreserved behavior. But on Lisbon Opera House, which was founded in 1793 by a group of businessmen and not by the crown, so it was a bourgeois theater where the aristocrats and the civil society converge, the royal presence was the exception. Unaware of Portuguese representation mechanisms and having little or no chance of coming across the royal family at the opera, German travelers often criticize the absence of monarchs in public theaters. And I quote, "Here at the theater, the poor Portuguese never see their king. The Portuguese court diligently evades the eyes of the people," end of quotation. Processions. A Dutch merchant negatively described the procession where the royal prince entered the town of Évora in 1797. He said that the procession was not exceptionally brilliant. Later on the description, we see that it actually had the same type of cavalry guards, chaise coupé, various carriages, and even a coach with 6 animals, which were the vehicle of distinction par excellence throughout Europe. At the end of his description, he adds that, and I quote, "All the bells of the countless churches were ringing and making such a noise as to make one lose sight and hearing," end of quote. So the Dutch traveler's greatest displeasure is channeled into the ringing of the bells, a feature associated with the sacred, and their inclusion in the royal staging. In their incessant ringing, they reinforce and underline the Catholic Church's connection to the royal family and gave sacred endorsement to secular codes of distinction. A public spectacle that caught the attention of foreign travelers was the bullfight. A German traveler described what he saw in 1797 as having the splendor and solemnity of the times of cavalry. In his description, we learned from the Royal Guard and the bullfighters entering the arena to the sound of slow war music. After the extended description of the solemn music, at some point there are masked musicians, men and women of very low social position, who dance several ballets with tambourines, copper cymbals, castanets, etc. I don't have time for more examples, but I can add that the majority of the descriptions are packed with comparisons to the traveler's hometown, concluding that they are much more civilized and educated as the practices they find here, which makes their surprise even bigger when they find a musical practice to be excellent here in Portugal. For instance, the Orchestra of the Royal Chamber, which was unanimously described as being outstanding. So now I will propose using a three-lever analysis, using the model of Fernando Clara, for traveler research. So let's begin with the intradiscursive materiality, which examines what is contained in the text, which concrete elements are there. So despite the discontent of the German traveler with the behavior of the Queen, his description of the exchange roles, the grandparents and the grandchildren, led to the identification of the opera, which was performed. And so now we know it was L'amore artigiano from Gaetano Latilla, that was known to have been performed in this theater a year before, and that only thanks to this passage was possible to confirm that it was also performed in 1763. So this is an objective element extracted from the Travelogue. This particular opera was played on that particular year. Other objective elements are the existence of more or less informal atmosphere in the Salvaterra de Mar, and the coexistence of two music types in bullfights, one slow, associated with power, solemnity, and the entrance of the king, and the other being more entertainment-like, with popular instruments and dances performed by men and women of lower social classes. The second level is the extra-discursive materiality, which examines what is external to the text, such as the historical, sociological, and political framework. What did these travelers find different? What are they reacting to just because it is similar or different to what they know? So now we find the displeasure for the lack of a clear separation in Portuguese musical practice for the sacred and the secular sphere, unlike what was the practice in Germany, and also the different type of majestic representation in Portugal, which was not in the opera. So the third and last is the identity and alterity level, which explores the text in a transnational, transcultural perspective, as described by Villaach and Tuck. And here we see in general a tendency for the affirmation of moral superiority of the country of origin and the seek of a national discourse and from depicting the exotic. So in conclusion, in the big picture, we find a large frame for German descriptions in which we can go down in levels and extract useful information. So now we have an amount of information that is more robust and detailed than what we would have get if we would just have taken the travelogue as each word as a factual truth. So, on the other hand, the fact that each travelogue is full of the author's personal opinions did not prevent us from extracting this useful information for musicological research. So in this example, the information can be used not only studies about the repertoire and music practices in the 18th century, but also of music and power, or even history of mentalities. Departing from the particular case of majestic representation in public state ceremonies, which is a very small part of a very broad corpus, this is in broad strokes a possible approach to using German travelogues as a musicological source, highlighting the important contribution of these sources to our knowledge of musical practices in Portugal in the 18th century, and whose in-depth study can only be encouraged. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Inês. Is there any question in the audience or in the internet? Okay, I have one question, actually two. So the point of view is about the German travelers, and do you think about looking at other countries as well and to see if there is some match between the different description? Because I think that's a very specific point of view. Okay, and so do you plan to cruzar, cross, thanks, to cross the information about other documents from other countries?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I did actually. I did it thoroughly. That was the subject of my dissertation, which I defended last year. So indeed, we can find for the same event, for the same opera representation, for instance, in the same theater in the same day, depending on the traveler, very different approaches. There is in general tendencies, of course, we should always also look at the not only the region, but the context, the social, political framework, and also, in many cases, if not all, the personal biographic information, because it also mixes with a lot of elements. But in general, so I'm talking about the broad tendency, in general, you can find a German look and a French look and an Italian look and a Spanish look, which are related to the what was happening in their hometown. So a German will mostly look after what he is to the pre-romantic and nationalistic aspects. He is full of this Empfindsamkeit, of this search for the primordial roots of the true nations and etc., which was being very present in the very different German courts at the time, but which was not yet being here present in Portugal and in Spain. It came later in the 19th century. Most things are to be seen under this light. But for instance, an Italian traveler would not take care of this, or a French one would not pay attention to these elements. A French one would pay attention to more elements of the protocol, and also if the French etiquette or the French influence is being observed or not, and so on and so on. So indeed, we find for different travelers, different perspectives. And it's very, very important when we are using these sources as musicological sources to take that in consideration, not assume that they saw this, so that it was like this. I used to say the only thing we can actually say from an assumption, a traveler said it was like this. The only thing we can take of that is that he said, or she, that it was like this. If it was like this, we don't know. If you thought it was like this, we also don't know. We have to look further.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you very much, Inês.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Another brief question about, we are always looking about accounts from people who travel from abroad. But to which extent can we compare this literature with the literature generated by Portuguese authors, memories and so on? Because we are always comparing with what was happening in Germany or in Spain. But to which extent can we compare that information that is always coming from abroad, from a different perspective, with the accounts of the Portuguese authors?
Thank you very much. Of course, this is something we do constantly, because we constantly we compare what the foreign travelers tell us to what is known from the local sources. We compare to all the things of the seminar of the patriarchal, what are they playing, teaching, saying, what are the Portuguese self image and what they intend to play and transmit. We are constantly comparing this to the foreign look, because it's the only way we can somehow in the middle have more material to actually try to understand what was going on. But the first thing we always do methodologically with these foreign accounts is to compare to the national sources. What were the theaters, the musicians saying or doing, or which documents we have locally about this context which is being talked about. It's the first thing.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to the next presentation.